I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, the sight of a masked man leaping through the air doing seemingly impossible stunts spoke directly to some lizard part of my brain. Now, the fork-tongued whispers of wrestling, the well-told lie of good versus evil would always capture my imagination, but there was something about a luchador that had an extra magnetism. Maybe it was the insane aerobatics, because I am sorry, Mr. Cornette, but flips is cool, but I think it fundamentally came down to the mystique of the mask, because masks are worn by everyone who's anyone in geekdom.
That's correct, Wendy. We all wear masks, metaphorically speaking.
Yeah, but also, like, literally, because you got masked up superheroes, swashbuckling adventures, ninja turtles, which is a lizard brain bingo. Masks confer mighty powers that can save the day, and no one knows what lies behind the masquerade. Which means it can be anyone under the face covering, even you. And for kids especially, that's a pretty neat feeling. Pop on a mask and suddenly you are Rey Mysterio. But as masks are synonymous symbols of lucha libre, it's worth noting where they actually come from. Are they some sacred tradition that has been passed down through thousands of years? What do they stand for? And what powers do they confer? I'm Laurie, hailing from partsFUNknown, and this is Lucha Masks Explained. Now, before we uncover the truth about luchador masks, please do consider giving this channel a subscribe. We know a lot of you regularly watch our content, but 50% of you aren't actually subscribed. And YouTube really loves it when people who are subscribed to your channel actually watch your videos, because it tends to show it to more people after that, making it easier for us to keep making this type of content. So ipso facto, you'd be doing us a really massive favour, and Adam is going to handwrite all of you letters of thanks. Lucha masks feel steeped in Latin American mysticism. They conjure images of ancient masked warriors taking on totemic powers associated with the spiritual figures the masks depict, giving the wearing of a mask this feeling of a ritual, a tradition that can be traced back thousands of years. And many promotions and wrestlers have been perfectly happy to lean into this lie.
Prince Puma rises to the top of the pyramid the way his ancient Aztec forefathers did.
Much like we discovered when we looked at the creation of Green Mist, videos up there, lucha masks actually started life as a US export. Now, masks have been used in wrestling for over 150 years if reports of a masked wrestler appearing at the 1865 World's Fair in Porto, Portugal are to be believed. It was Frenchman Theobald Bauer who was said to don his disguise as he toured France as a member of the circus. But the man credited with popularising the gimmick was Mort Henderson. The story goes that at the 1915 New York International Wrestling Tournament, the crowd had grown bored with the action and attendance was dropping until a masked man strode through the audience, seated himself near the stage and issued a challenge to the wrestlers. News of this mysterious figure circulated through the papers, and suddenly the Manhattan Opera House was full to bursting. This masked marvel, as he came to be known, became the centre of a storm of speculation. And all the while, under the mask, was humble Mort Henderson, a journeyman performer whose own star had faded somewhat in recent years, and Henderson would fade back into relative obscurity, but the masked marvel would endure. Meanwhile, to the south, Mexico was embroiled in a bloody revolution that would span the 1910s, and two Italian businessmen, Giovanni Rosselevich and Antonio Fournier, seized the opportunity to offer the beleaguered people a distraction. They began to organise matches between fighters. These were bare-knuckled and with no weapons. It became known as lucha libre, or free fighting. The Mexican wrestling scene relied heavily on imports from the US for many years, until Salvador Luteroth Gonzalez, the so-called father of lucha libre, formed the first Mexican-owned promotion, the Empresa Mexicana de Lucha Libre, or the EMLL, in 1933. Within a year, they were selling out their home base, the previously run-down Arena Modelo, and gathering crowds of 5,000 paying fans. In those early days, though, the EMLL also had to rely on American talent, and it was one of those bookings that changed everything. Corbin James Massey had been working throughout Texas in the early 1930s as Cyclone Mackey and caught the eye of Luchador, who brought him to the EMLL. Cyclone Mackey wrestled the very first show, but a year later he would don a mask to become La Maravilla Enmascarada, or the Masked Marvel. Now, where have I heard that before? La Maravilla Enmascarada was an outsized hit with the Mexican crowd, drawing way above the mid-card expectations of his contemporaries in the US. So much so that Luchador began to introduce more and more masked characters to the EMLL, known as Enmascarados. This allowed the promotion to focus more on their homegrown talent, which in turn let them expand across Mexico, and at the same time cemented this idea that the mask was part of what defined a luchador. The masks, they had no meaning, they had no actual significance beyond their ability to draw. So as with all mysteries, people, promoters, wrestlers, the fans began to fill in that significance. Since the Maya wore masks for many occasions. They wore protective but intimidating masks to war, they were buried in death masks that would shield them on their journey to the afterlife, and for religious ceremonies would wear masks that represented different animals whose spirits were entwined with the gods and conferred a portion of their power onto the wearer. Sort of like a strong king might be in a jaguar mask, or you might get a sort of a Prince Puma. The Aztecs too believed masks had an intrinsic power, as described by Dr. Celia F. Klein, an art history professor at UCLA, who said masks were valuable because they were thought to be powerful. They derived some of their power from the materials used to make them. The most powerful and prestigious masks were made of the rarest, most costly materials. So to even own a mask was a status symbol, which is something that can really easily be brought forward to tie into the sort of luchador honor system. You lose your mask, you lose your status. And this is kind of the crazy thing here, because none of this is why lucha masks exists, but the parallels throughout history just keep cropping up. Another Mesoamerican society known as the Olmecs had these pretty gross masks with disfigured faces that suggested a kind of transformation into birds, lizards and felines, which was bringing the human and the natural together in a way that would come to define their cosmology. And they also apparently produced this very famous sculpture that has come to be known as the Wrestler. And while it's widely debated as to its authenticity and its subject matter, as it's really likely not about a wrestler, you can see how all of these myths can muddy the true origin of something as simple as a mask, especially when the veil of kayfabe is drawn across it too. And masks afford a really serious firewall of kayfabe for luchadors, right? Because at the end of the show, it comes off and the wrestler gets to walk down the street completely anonymous. No one the wiser that this man, who admittedly is built like a brick house, is the high-flying performer they just saw. It's kind of your Clark Kent Superman kind of disguise. But he's not wearing glasses. Except I don't even think that the masks in Lucha Libre are really meant to be read as masks. These are the characters' faces, right? Theatrical performance dating back to ancient Greece used masks to bring to life beings of immense power. It started with the worship of Dionysus, who you may know as the lounge lizard god of wine from Hades.
Hey there, Zag man, how's it going?
Hello, sir. I'm drunk on horny. As part of these 6th century rituals, communicants would impersonate the deity through disguise, kind of making the god manifest, which also inspired them to speak as the god, to speak in first person, which essentially invented the art of drama. Ritual dramas then commonly began to use masks to represent the gods, demons, and even concepts like sin, and they continue to do that throughout history. And I'd argue that Lucha Libre is part of that global tradition, because what is wrestling if not one big, really bloody weird morality play? And the masks of luchadors, though they started out in these simple block colours so they could be seen from the back of an arena, still became the face, the symbol of the Blue Demon, or the Phantom, or Spider-Man. That one works less well. Thanks, Ray. but generally they invoke creatures of myth, benevolent deities, or creeping darkness, kind of aspects the performer takes on during the match. Even the idea of high-flying and improbable stunts feels like something summoned, something more than human. I mean, it's definitely about more than a bloke who doesn't want to be recognised when he's out buying protein powder. You can get a hat and sunglasses for that. Masks are totems of power, so when luchadors lose them in the kind of dreaded mask versus mask match, it's a disgrace, a dishonour, and it's disempowering. That's why when the mask comes off, it's usually as part of a retirement, or at least a retirement of that character, because the mask at that point has lost its power. It's kind of the same reason Samson didn't go scooping up his offcuts after Delilah gave him Legend's first lockdown mullet. And even this process of wagering masks can be linked back to the Aztecs, as Dr. Klein of UCLA says. In Aztec society, a warrior who killed his first captive was said to assume another face. Regardless of whether this expression referred literally to a trophy mask or was simply a figure of speech, it implies that the youth's new face represented a new social identity or status. In Lucha, if you conquer a fierce rival, you can take their face, their status as your own, just not in the skin flay way of the Aztecs. Maybe they do that in ECW. Think about how Kevin Nash unmasked Rey Mysterio Jr. in WCW, which led him to inherit the gimmick of his uncle, Rey Mysterio with an I, now spelled with a Y in WWE, because these are two separate, nearly indistinguishable gimmicks. Or how one of the most famous luchadors of all time, El Santo, never removed his mask during his 40-year career, even being buried in his trademark silver face covering. And it's some of Rodolfo Guzman, the man beneath the mask's reverence for his character, that informs some of the myth of Lucha Libre today. But I hear you screaming in the comments, you said none of this myth stuff has anything to do with lucha masks. And it doesn't really, because masks were adopted in Mexico for one reason alone: money. But it also has everything to do with the myth stuff. Now, Dr. Klein described the Aztecs like this. Like many Mesoamerican peoples, the Aztecs made extensive use of masks. They were, in other words, what the anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss termed a mask culture. Now, in his book, The Way of the Mask, French anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss posited that mythical representations cannot be understood as isolated objects. This was specifically referring to the masks of the Northwest Pacific Coast tribes, saying they cannot be interpreted in and by themselves as separate objects. He instead tried to draw parallels between the masks of one group and the masks of another people, saying they all informed and transformed each other, creating this greater pantheon for the region. He said they are parts of a system within which they transform each other. As in the case with myths, masks, with their origin myths and the rites in which they appear, become intelligible only through the relationships which unite them. And Lucha Libre, through its masks, creates this pantheon of figures who represent gods, animals, forces of natures, bloody Wolverine, and each interrelation between your Technicos and your Rudos, your goodies and your baddies, your lineages, your El Hijo del Fantasma, your Rey Mysterio Jr., your tag team mask coordination. All of this has fundamentally created the myth of masks where there wasn't actually a myth before. It is very literally a mask culture. And every little clod of meaning that lucha masks have gathered as they've rolled through their existence, be it links to the Maya or the Aztecs, to the divine, to superheroes, changes our understanding of them. It's all part of an ongoing, ever-evolving dialogue. We all wear masks, metaphorically speaking. But luchadors literally wear masks, and metaphorically, they keep morphing and changing meaning as more and more wrestlers add to the tradition, and as fans continue to draw parallels with myth. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it, please leave a like, a comment with your thoughts on lucha masks, and if you haven't already and you never want to miss a video in this series or any of the other great ones that we got here on PFK, you have to subscribe to the channel. As I said earlier, your letters of thanks from Adam Blompier are in the post. Now, if you enjoyed this video on masks, why not check out this video on Sting, because it's sort of about face paint, which is sort of like masks, but it's mostly about how the Icon has been a figure that stands against WWE for all of his career. There is also this one where Luke asks, is Edge actually good? The short answer is yes. The long answer is the video. I will see you next time. Jam that jam.